Hello, friends and neighbors. This is Tim Daniels again here on the campus of the Trinity Guards Church of Christ. And we welcome you to what we call a moment with the Master. Perhaps one of the greatest passages of scriptures that I have ever read is the 23rd Psalm. Since I was a child, this passage has brought comfort and encouragement and strength to not only me and my family, but just so many, particularly when we're going through the valleys of life. It starts off with the Lord is my shepherd, and this whole text talks about how in the midst of a storm, in the midst of traumatic times, God gives peace and comfort and rest. And he restores and he repairs and he rebuilds. But there's one thing I'd like to focus on is that in this particular psalm, in verse 5, God does something else. The Bible said, and this is David talking about what God does. He said, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And for years, because I knew the story of David, and he had enemies like Goliath and like his father-in-law, who was the previous king, who was jealous and tried to kill him, the Amalekites, the Philistines. He had a lot of physical enemies. And so when this text says that he prepares a table in front of me in the presence of my enemies, that's who I thought it was. But as I studied this text, I discovered that those were not the enemies that I believe David was speaking of. Not Saul, not Goliath, not the Philistines. I think the enemies that David was speaking of was regret and mistakes and shame and guilt and fear and low self-esteem and sorrow and insecurity and bitterness. I believe those are the enemies that were surrounding the table that David was sitting at with his Lord and Savior and his shepherd, Jesus Christ. And here's the thing about those enemies. They want to sit at that table with David. And David is saying, this is a table for two. Just me and my shepherd, just me and my Lord. How do you know when the enemy is sitting at a table with you and your shepherd? Well, number one, when you begin to think that you're not going to make it through. If you ever feel like you're not going to make it through, that's an indicator that the enemy is sitting at the table. Number two, when you begin to think that there's something better at another table. When you begin to think there's something better at another table, because Satan has prepared tables too, but the food on his table will make you sick. The food on Satan's table is poisonous. And so when you begin to feel like there is more hope at another table instead of at the table sitting with Jesus, your shepherd, then that's an indicator that the enemy is sitting at your table. Also, when you begin to think that everyone is after you, that's fear and insecurity. When you ever feel that way, that everybody's after you and they're talking about you. Now, there are enemies and there are people who may not like you, but when you feel like everyone is against you, that's an indicator that the enemy is sitting at the table. And then if you ever begin to feel like things won't get better, that's an indicator that the enemy is sitting at the table. Listen, friend, the table that Jesus sets for you is a table for two. You and your Lord, you and your shepherd. Do not invite the enemy to sit with you. They are not allowed. Thank you very much for this time with you, and I pray that you and the Savior will always spend that time together. Thank you.